The ocean whispered softly that evening, its rhythmic sighs weaving into the hum of conversation from the small seaside cafe. The cafe wasn't much, a scattering of wooden tables, some draped with faded blue cloths, others bare and marked with the names of lovers carved years ago. Lanterns hung from ropes above, swaying gently in the breeze, casting warm gold circles of light that shimmered against the rippling sea below. Maya sat near the edge of the deck, her chair angled just enough to let her gaze rest on the horizon. The sun was sinking, bleeding orange and pink into the restless blue, and she traced the waves absently with her eyes. Her notebook lay open before her, half filled with sentences that didn't seem to belong to one another, fragments of thoughts, half-formed poems, dreams she hadn't dared to speak aloud. The page before her read, "Some hearts wait for the tide that never comes." She sighed and tapped her pen. This cafe had become her escape, a quiet refuge from the endless rhythm of city life, deadlines, expectations, and the quiet ache that had taken root in her chest after her last breakup. Here, the air smelled of salt and roasted coffee, and time seemed to loosen its grip. The owner, an old man named Kareem, never asked questions. He just refilled her cup and nodded, as though he understood that silence could be more comforting than conversation. The bell over the door tinkled softly, a sound that carried across the warm dusk. Maya didn't look up at first. It wasn't unusual for a few late visitors to wander in after. Sunset, tourists hoping for a view, or locals catching the last light. But something about the newcomer's footsteps, measured, deliberate, confident, drew her attention. She glanced up. He was tall, maybe in his early 30s, dressed simply in a white shirt rolled at the sleeves and sand-colored trousers. His skin was sun-touched, and his dark hair fell in loose waves that caught the light. But what caught her attention most were his eyes, calm yet bright, like a deep river holding a storm beneath its surface. He looked around the cafe, his gaze skimming over the few remaining tables before landing, by chance or fate, on hers. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. She looked away first, pretending to study her notebook again. But she could feel the faint echo of that gaze, curious, steady, almost familiar. He ordered something at the counter. Coffee, she guessed. And then, instead of choosing one of the empty tables, he walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth, carrying an accent that hinted at places she couldn't name. "Is this seat taken?" Maya blinked, caught between surprise and politeness. The cafe was half empty, but she found herself nodding. "No, go ahead." He smiled, not the kind of smile that expected anything, but one that simply acknowledged the small kindness she'd offered. As he sat, the lantern light touched his face, softening the lines around his mouth. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of waves filled the silence between them. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said after a moment. "It's just that the view from this side looked better." Maya smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the rim of her cup. "The view is always better from where we aren't sitting." He chuckled, a low, genuine sound that made something in her chest loosen. "True enough. I'm Rach." "Maya!" He repeated her name quietly, almost as if testing how it felt to say it aloud. Then he nodded, satisfied. "Nice to meet you, Maya." For a while, their conversation stayed on the surface, where they were from, what brought them here, how the sea had its own kind of language. Raj told her he'd grown up near the coast, too, but on the other side of the country. His father had been a fisherman, his mother a teacher. He'd moved to the city young, chasing work, chasing something he couldn't quite name. "Now," he said, "I come back whenever I forget what silence sounds like." "That's why I come here, too," Maya said softly. She didn't usually share much with strangers, but something about him made her forget the careful walls she usually built. Maybe it was the steadiness in his eyes, or the way he listened, really listened. Without interrupting or trying to fill the space, he asked about her notebook, about the poems she wrote, about what drew her to words. "I think," she said after a pause, "I write because it's the only way I know how to stop time, to hold a feeling still before it fades." He nodded, thoughtful. "And what happens when the words fade too?" "Then I write new ones." He smiled again, a slow curve of his lips that carried both admiration and sadness. "That's brave," he said quietly. The sky deepened into twilight, streaks of indigo folding into the horizon. Kareem lit the larger lanterns around the deck, and the sea turned to silver beneath the moonlight. Somewhere nearby, a musician began strumming a guitar, the melody drifting lazily through the air. Raj leaned back, watching the horizon. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe the sea remembers us? All the people who've stood here, poured their thoughts into it, whispered their heartbreaks to the waves?" Maya followed his gaze. "If it does," she said, "it must be very tired." He laughed again, but there was a note of melancholy in it, the kind that comes from someone who has known both joy and loss. She recognized it instantly. It was the same undertone that had colored her own laughter for months. They fell into an easy rhythm after that, sipping coffee, trading stories, filling the air with fragments of themselves. She learned that he loved old songs, that he collected postcards from every place he visited, that he carried a small camera everywhere, but rarely took pictures of people. "Why not?" she asked. "Because moments change when you look at them through a lens," he said. "I like to remember them as they were, imperfect and alive." The wind picked up, tugging playfully at Maya's hair. She tucked a strand behind her ear, and Raj's eyes lingered on the motion, just long enough for her to notice. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only quiet curiosity, the kind that made her pulse quicken despite herself. For a second, she wanted to ask more. Where he lived now. What brought him here tonight? But something held her back. Maybe it was fear of breaking the fragile magic of the moment, or the instinct that some questions were better left for later. So instead she said, "Do you ever feel like some meetings aren't accidents?" He looked at her, really looked, and the lantern light caught the faint lines at the corner of his eyes. "All the time," he said. "But the trick is knowing which ones are gifts and which are tests." Maya smiled faintly. "And how do you tell the difference?" He tilted his head as if considering. "I don't think you can, not at first. You just stay long enough to find out." A long silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The music had slowed to a soft hum, and the sea seemed to hush around them as though listening in. Somewhere behind the counter, Kareem extinguished a few lamps, signaling closing time, but neither Maya nor Raj moved. Finally, Raj rose and set some bills on the table. "It's getting late," he said, his voice softer now. "But I'll be back tomorrow, if you don't mind the same company." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "I don't mind." He smiled one last time, a quiet, lingering smile that seemed to promise something, though she couldn't quite name what. Then he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night, leaving behind only the soft echo of his presence and the scent of sea salt on the air. Maya sat for a long time after he left. The ocean had darkened completely now, its surface reflecting 1,000 trembling stars. She looked down at her notebook, at the unfinished line waiting for her pen. Slowly she wrote, "Some hearts wait for the tide that never comes, and some find the tide sitting across the table asking for a seat." She closed the notebook and smiled, a small, private smile meant for no one but herself. The waves kept whispering, the lanterns kept swaying, and somewhere far down the beach, a lone figure paused to look back at the cafe, as if drawn by a feeling he didn't yet understand. The night wrapped itself around both of them, the beginning of something fragile, uncertain and beautiful.